Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is a review of the 1991 direct-to-video sequel, Critters 3, You Are What They Eat. Now, this film is the first of two back-to-back sequels that were shot one after another around the exact same time with the same set budget. One of the producers for the first two films, Barry Opper, he came up with this idea because the Critters films were actually doing fairly well on the home video market. And so he saw that the Critters films were gaining some momentum in terms of a little bit of a cult following. So he wanted to take advantage of that by doing more Critters films. He wasn't expecting New Line to do anything theatrically because of the financial failure of Critters 2, so he went in and asked New Line if they could give him and his crew a set amount of money. I think it was like $3 to $4 million, and they would shoot two Critters sequels for the price of one. And that's where Critters 3 began. It was born into this world on this whole idea of doing two Critters films back to back. In all honesty, the concept and the idea of doing two of these films back to back was way too ambitious for the budget, and that's why the two of these films, one is significantly better than the other in terms of the storytelling, in terms of having more set pieces, in terms of having more things and more critters compared to the other, because the other film didn't have nearly as much money or as much time to put things together. So Barry Opper went after directors that were a little bit lesser known and people that he could afford. He decided to go with the director Christine Peterson because he saw some of her work and liked what she had done. He specifically liked how dark her films were. She has done a bunch of direct-to-video stuff even before this. Probably her most well-known film among horror fans is Deadly Dreams. I haven't seen the film, so I can't really say anything, but I do remember the cover art being pretty sweet. But she was given the job, and I'm not going to be too hard on her direction in this film because she did not really have a whole lot of time. She was under a time crunch. She also didn't have that big of a budget. And on top of that, she didn't really have the ability to really fully do her vision for the film because there's a lot of things that she had to not do or do differently because of the different constraints that she was put under. Even despite these constraints, I thought the direction was fine. You could tell that she had experience. She knew her way around a camera. She ran a good set. She was a good captain for the ship. There were a few different sequences that were shot fairly well. I would say when it comes to sequences that are meant to be more suspenseful and tense, I actually thought she did a legitimately impressive job with those particular sequences. One that really stands out to me is the sequences that are only lit with a flare in a dark room. And there's a few other sequences here and there that were fairly well done. Once the film gets its furry ball rolling, she did a good job with the action, shooting the critter puppets, and so on and so forth. So it's one of those films where the direction isn't amazing, but it's serviceable. It's decent enough, and with a direct-to-video film, that's honestly some of the best direction you can ask for with a direct-to-video movie, because it's very rare to get direction in a direct-to-video lower budgeted film that is genuinely spectacular or up there with some of the bigger budgeted and blockbuster films. It features a screenplay by David J. Shaw, who decided to do this film because I believe he was in New Line's offices around the time. He overheard that they were doing these Critters movies. He offered his services, and the rest is history. David J. Shows worked on other stuff. He actually, prior to this, worked on Freddy's Nightmares, the TV series. Uh, and originally, he thought he was just going to write Critters 3, but then he wound up writing a good chunk of Critters 4. So he was given the task of double duty for this particular series of sequels. The screenplay, it's just like the direction. It's solid, it's serviceable. It's nothing particularly great or inventive all the way around. But there are some nice touches. I like the fact that the critters have different looks and appearances, and even have names for one another. Uh, Bleach, Blackie. It was nice to see differentiating kind of things with the critters. Specifically, I really like Bleach. I like the look of Bleach. The critter ends up getting his face exposed to bleach, and it burns and scalds one side of his face, and he's got one eye, and he's got a white dyed fur on one side of his head because it was bleached out. And there's another one that ate some dish soap and is coughing bubbles. There's another one that ate some beans and farted. Thankfully, it's not a very long scene, but I didn't care for that scene. I just don't care for those kind of scenes, period. I don't like. I just think that type of humor is lowbrow and lazy. It's low hanging fruit, and I've never found fart jokes particularly that funny. One of the funniest fart jokes to me is a joke where you don't even hear the fart. It's the sequence in Liar Liar when Jim Carrey's character is in the elevator, and everyone's like got a look on their face like, oh my god, like something stinks, and then he turns around and he's like, it was me. Like that cracks me up. And it's because of Jim Carrey's energy. And that's an example of a fart joke that works, but most of the time they don't work. And the critters sequence is an example of that. There's some really fun gags in this. For one, I love the scene where the critters are sitting on a couch in an apartment and they're watching Julia Child. They're watching a cooking show. That's just a really fun gag. And there's a few other bits and pieces that I didn't mind. I like the fact that Don Opper's character Charlie, he's got like his own makeshift weapon, and so on and so forth. And I think the characters, for the most part, were written fairly well. None of them were particularly that unlikable. Even some of the more supporting characters, like the elderly couple, were well done and had their moments. There were a couple characters I didn't really care for in terms of the characterization. Mainly, I would say the biggest one for me is Frank, who's like this landlord. He's not the landlord. He's like a maintenance guy who works at the apartment complex. It's played by Geoffrey Blake, and I don't know what this performance is, except annoying. Like, it's a very annoying performance, and Geoffrey Blake has the fakest, worst New York accent I've ever heard in my life. What the fuck was that? Like, what was that? That was not a New York accent. I've never heard a New York accent like that until I saw this movie. Um, Thankfully, David J. Shaw, the screenwriter, he knew that this character was going to get on people's nerves quick, so he was axed, and he was the first one to die like 15 minutes into the movie. So thankfully, he doesn't overstay his welcome. Another character I didn't really care for is Betty, who's this overweight gal who lives in the apartment complex, and the typical, usual fat, jokes. Oh, the whole sort of thing where she's a fat lady in a moo and is eating all the time and is for some reason horny. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Didn't really, not needed, not necessary. She actually was one of the survivors because I guess they thought it was such a great character. I honestly would have been fine if she got killed off. Would have left the story with more development and more time for Josh and Annie to develop a relationship and some more chemistry with one another. But that's just my personal feelings on that. I also really don't care for the whole stuff with the little brother. I know some people might consider it to be like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, and I totally understand. But to me, the kid served no purpose. Johnny, played by I think it's Christian and Joseph Cousins, two twin brothers who are actually in Kindergarten Cop. The little boy served no purpose to the overall story. You knew that nothing was going to happen to this kid. Even in the climax, when he's hanging off the side of the edge of the building, you knew that he was not going to die. Uh, the kid serves only one purpose: to do some cute shit, look cute in his Oshkosh bagosh, and that's it. I honestly would have been fine if he was written out of the film because there are moments where you have to have this kid and his glowing crystal and all this other stuff, and you could have had more scenes with Don Opper as Charlie or more stuff with Josh and Annie. But that's just me personally. Uh, Speaking of Josh and Annie, let's get to my thoughts on the cast. So Leonardo DiCaprio has his acting debut in this film as a character named Josh. Now, unlike some of the later releases of this film, will try to make you believe he's not the star of this film. He has a decent amount of screen time, and he does an okay job with what he's given. He's not given a very meaty role, so he's not really that impressive. Honestly, DiCaprio is one of those actors that's a poster child for a slow starter, for for a reason why you should not judge an actor based on their work as a kid. Like, you should wait till they mature and have more opportunities to hone their craft. DiCaprio did not start out as some amazing talent early on. And what's interesting is there are cases of actors who start off with a ton of roles at a young age, and then when they get older, they really don't get that much work. And for example, Macaulay Culkin is one of them. Henry Thomas was another. And the work that they do get is not really of the same caliber. They're not doing leading roles. They're not doing stuff like that. So they kind of cap off at a certain age. But then you have actors like DiCaprio who start off slow and aren't really that impressive and then go on to become Oscar winning amazing actors in their own right. So it's one of those, it's a testament to being patient when it comes to an actor. And it took DiCaprio quite a long time because I didn't even think he was that great in Titanic. So it took him a while to really become a legitimate force in Hollywood. It's sad to see that he's disowned this film. I don't understand why actors feel like projects like this that they did when they were younger are beneath them. It's a part of your history. It's honestly not a bad thing at all to remember where you came from, to put things into perspective. It makes your rise to Oscar-winning actor even more impressive and more amazing. I don't understand what does DiCaprio have to gain by disowning this movie? Nothing. It's just pretty. It's just petty bullshit. This is probably what it is. It's Hollywood politics. He doesn't want to be associated with it because people would think it's a joke or whatever. But whatever. That's honestly how I feel about that. You should just be like, fuck it. Yeah, I was in Critters 3 and own it. And what are they going to do? What are your peers going to do in Hollywood? Are they going to ostracize you just because you're not embarrassed about your involvement in this movie? By all intents and purposes, from those who worked on the film, who were on the set, the producers, and so on and so forth around Leo, he had a good time with the film. He especially liked being around the critters, as you can see in a lot of different publicity photos that have been around on the internet. And I would have liked to have seen more of this character. He didn't really get to do a whole lot. He's just there for eye candy in some ways for the younger girls in the audience and others, because really that's honestly what DiCaprio was early on in his career. He was a poor man's Jonathan Taylor Thomas. He was that kind of actor who was cast more for his looks versus his actual ability. I think also he was cast because he actually did a document. He actually, not a documentary. He did a advertisement with, I think, one of the producers. So that's why he was on the fast track to get the role. Aimee Brooks is the lead in this film. It's not DiCaprio. She plays a character named Annie. And honestly, I think she did a good job. The character's likable enough. She's not particularly memorable, but she's got a certain resourcefulness to her. She's also seems like a genuinely good person, this character. So she's not particularly unlikable. At times she can be a little bit bland, but I think that's honestly more due to the script than anything that Aimee Brooks is providing. Don Opper is back as Charlie, and once again does a really nice job with the role. I just wish he was in the film more. As much as I didn't mind Annie, I really wish it was more of Don Opper, his film, Don Opper hunting critters or something. Maybe he comes across this family earlier on, and then there's a little bit more going on with that character. Honestly, it plays out more as an extended cameo than anything else with the character of Charlie. He shows up for a bit in the beginning and then shows up near the climax. You have John Calvin, who plays Clifford. I believe that's the John Calvin plays the landlord. Apparently, this guy was in films like Flesh Gordon. This guy is a poor man's Elliot Gould. There's a lot of poor man's actors in this. You have a poor man's Jonathan Taylor Thomas in Leonardo DiCaprio. You have a poor man's Elliot Gould in John Calvin. You have a lot of poor man's actors in this. Well, that makes sense because it's a film that's made on a quite significantly lower budget compared to the first two films. William Dennis Hunt. Actually, no, Clifford is a different character. I got the two confused. Really, it's William Dennis Hunt who plays the landlord, who's a poor man's Elliot Gould. My bad. I'm the one being a poor man right now with my poor use of, not necessarily vocabulary, but my poor use of memory. Nina Axelrod, she plays the wife of Briggs. The reason why those two characters are there is because Briggs is the father of Josh, and he's the reason why Josh ends up with the main character Annie and her family in the climax, because his dad gets eaten by critters. And it's his stepfather, by the way. John Calvin is the father of Annie and her little brother. He's a poor man's. Trying to think of. I know the actor, and he was. It kind of just blew my mind when I just did this recently, because I was like, oh, he's a poor man's dad from Family Ties. I was like, Michael Gross. Because really, he's got the beard, he's got the whole sort of sensibility. Like, he's a poor man's Michael Gross. And when I did the research to look up who the dad was, it's Michael Gross. And I'm like, wow, so it's Bert. It's Gummer from Tremors. And like, they're two totally different characters. Like, I have a hard time believing that actor played the same character. He played the same characters. Like I'm even having a hard time like I'm kind of discombobulated thinking about it because it's honestly kind of unbelievable to me. But that just goes to show you how talented of an actor Michael Gross is. John Calvin, he's fine. He's nothing amazing, but he's not particularly, egregious or awful in any way. Terrence Mann has a bit role as Ugg, shows up as a hologram near the end. It's only like a minute, so it's really just a little cameo. Frances Bay is in this as Mrs. Menges, who was in plenty of stuff. She was in an episode of Tales from the Crypt called Judy, You're Not Yourself Today. So it was fun to see her in this. And there's a fun little bit with her with a giant meat cleaver. And that leads to a fun effects gag later on where a critter gets cut with the meat cleaver. So yeah, overall, not a particularly jaw-dropping or spectacular cast by any means, but serviceable and strong enough. I mean, that's really where this film tends to fall for me for the most part, is serviceable, strong enough in terms of overall quality, from the direction, from the writing to the cast. I would say the film's strongest suit, though, is the effects work by the Kyoto Brothers and Company. They did a little extra, few different things. The technology had advanced to the point where they were able to do more things with the critters. So there's more articulation with the puppets, especially with their limbs. So that's really cool to see. There's also some really fun shots and stuff with the critters, and really great critter gags. Some nice stuff in the climax. And it's always fun to see Don Opper as Charlie blowing up critters. And it was nice to see a callback to the first film, where it was back to small spaces, it was back to one location, and only a handful of critters. So it really enabled the film to have some genuinely suspenseful moments, with critters jumping out of cupboards and going after people and stuff like that. This film has a score by David C. Williams, but it's really not that great, especially compared to the music from the first two films. It's definitely a massive step down. Cinematography by Thomas L. Calloway. It's there. It's not anything to write home about. The editing, though, in this, I actually liked quite a bit. It really added a lot of energy to certain sequences, and in some scenes really made them pop, and was the determining factor to why the sequence worked as well as it did. The editing by Terry Stokes. In particular, there's a sequence that I like to call Bowling for Critters, where there's a handful of critters that are at the bottom of a staircase, and the character of Annie, she rolls a trash can down the stairs and hits the critters. And what could have easily just been a fun scene where the critters get hit by the trash can and get bowled over, it becomes something special with the editing, where the sequence has a cut in between the action of the trash can rolling down the stairs of a TV with a bowling match on. And then on top of that, there's also bowling sound effects. So there's a sound effects from the bowling match that was on TV that's cut to the action of the trash can rolling and hitting the critters. I thought it was a really fun edit, and there's a fair number of those kind of edits in this particular film. Ultimately, I didn't think this was anywhere near as bad as a lot of the critics made it out to be. I don't think it's as bad as its IMDb rating is. I mean, this film has a really low IMDb rating, low Rotten Tomatoes score. Has a 4.4 on IMDb. It has a 0 on Rotten Tomatoes. And I don't think it's anywhere near that bad. It takes a bit to get rolling. But once the furry ball gets rolling, it's actually pretty entertaining. I thought it was an enjoyable time waster. There's some fun critters bits with the critters rolling around, wreaking havoc. The direction was solid enough. It had some nice, clever edits. The characters, for the most part, were decent or likable enough. Uh, I don't get the hate. I don't understand. I mean, for a direct-to-video sequel, you could do a lot worse. And I mean, it's only 80 something minutes, so it's not really that boring. There were things about it that I didn't like. I don't like the Frank character. He's annoying, with the worst New York accent I've ever heard in my entire life. I didn't really care for the fat comic relief character, uh, played by what was it? I'm trying to remember who that character is. Like, oh, Diana Bellamy, Rosalie. I didn't really care for that character. Oh, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention Katherine Cortez, who played Marcia. I actually really liked that character. I liked the performance as well. It's too bad, though, that she spends most of the climax just hanging from a telephone wire. But it's not the worst thing. At least she didn't die. But I mean, could be better in some places, but also could have been a lot worse. I wouldn't say it's on the same level as the first two. In fact, it's multiple steps down from the first two films in terms of overall quality, but you could do a lot worse in Critters 3. Decent, enjoyable enough direct to video entertainment. I would recommend it if you were a fan of the first two. I think you can have some fun with this one. Anyway, thanks for watching my review of Critters 3. Oh, one more thing about the Blu-ray, as people might be asking. This is the first time you get to see the film in widescreen, which is definitely an improvement over the previous releases. Decent transfer. There's a little documentary. It's only 20 something minutes that gives you a little bit of info, but it's nothing extensive. But it's a fun little documentary. Get to hear about some of the crazy stuff that happened on the sets. There was a fire, and because they shot it on a supermarket set, it was some abandoned supermarket. When the fire went off, it caused the sprinklers to go off. So then that just completely just ruined the set, and critter puppets were singed and wet, and it just made it even more hectic and chaotic. And since it was a low budget production and they were shooting this back to back with Critters 4, they lost an entire day of shooting. So it's honestly kind of a miracle that this film even got finished, and let alone has as many legitimately nice moments and bits of entertainment that it does, because of the constraints that were put onto it. But you know, I'm glad Critters 3 exists, because there's some fun stuff, and also have a little bit of fun trivia with Leo's acting debut. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of Critters 3, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.